A strong pace. President Trump hails an economy posting its best numbers in 4 years. We're at the White House. A final journey. Why a tangible result of the summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un involves the remains of U.S. soldiers. Fighting back. The church reacts to a recent study casting doubt on the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin. And Humanae Vitae at 50. Why Pope Paul VI's letter on contraception remains relevant and empowers women. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, July 27, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump calls the U.S. the envy of the entire world after new economic data is released. The White House says the president's pro-growth policies are, quote, defying the critics. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump says he's thrilled with the new numbers. He says that business and consumer confidence has reached historic highs, and the president believes the good news will keep coming.
We've accomplished an economic turnaround of historic proportions.
Numbers announced today show the U.S. economy surging in the second quarter to an annual growth rate of 4.1% GDP, the fastest pace since 2014. The president celebrating a report that indicates the longest positive job growth streak in history, an addition of 400,000 new manufacturing jobs, and unemployment at the lowest level in almost 50 years.
If economic growth continues at this pace, the United States economy will double in size more than 10 years faster than it would have under either President Bush or President Obama.
The president says the growth is very sustainable, but private forecasters caution the numbers come from temporary factors. They say exporters are rushing to ship products out before other countries slap tariffs on the U.S. for imposing tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. Still, President Trump believes his policies are working. After he railed against other countries for unfair trade deals, he was happy to share this.
The trade deficit, very dear to my heart because we've been ripped off by the world, has dropped by more than $50 billion.
Though the narrowing trade deficit has added to economic growth, economists have expressed concern that a full-blown trade war between the United States and China, the world's two biggest economies, would hurt growth in both countries. Wyatt.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. And joining me is Stephen Moore, former senior economic advisor to President Trump's campaign and distinguished fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Stephen, welcome, man.
Hi, Wyatt.
President Trump is calling this a historic turnaround, as we heard, and he's taking credit. Is that accurate to call it that?
Well, it certainly has been a turnaround since Donald Trump took office. And we saw what I call the Trump effect almost immediately after the election. You saw it in consumer and business confidence. And, you know, I think a lot of policies that Trump has put into effect have really helped bump up growth. And by the way, it's not just the growth numbers that are positive. Almost more importantly is, you know, we're seeing such great numbers in jobs. You know, the tax cuts, the deregulation, the pro-American energy policies, I think those have all had a positive impact. The question is whether this is sustainable. This is just one quarter of growth, and you know it's a really good number, but we want to see that for 4 or 5 or 6 quarters. And so, but I think he deserves some of the credit, and I think even some of his critics are giving him the credit for this.
Well, what do you think? Do you think that this is sustainable, or do you think inevitably we're going to have to hit some kind of an economic slowdown?
Well, look, I was one of the people who told Donald Trump during the campaign we can get to 4% growth, and he used to say, I want 5% growth. That's just like Trump. But no, I do think it is sustainable. You know, if you we're getting a lot of capital in from the rest of the world. Now, what are the problem areas with the economy? One is trade. You know, we have to get a trade deal done. I was very happy with the deal that Donald Trump got with the Europeans. Now, that's just a handshake right now, so we'll have to see whether this turns out to be real. But, you know, lowering tariffs on both sides of the Atlantic, that's a great thing for the global economy. By the way, trade, you know, this is a Catholic show. Trade is one of the most important things to reduce world poverty. You know, the more trade you have, the more you actually, the people who benefit the most from trade are the lowest income people in the world. The other thing is, do we have enough workers in this country to fill the jobs? You know, I gave a talk last week to to major manufacturers. And, you know, we were talking about the good economic numbers, and a lot of them came up to me, the men and women who run these companies, and said, our problem is we don't have the workers to fill the jobs. And if that happens, that's going to maybe slow down growth. So we've got to figure out how to get more people in the workforce.
Well, when it comes to the issue of trade and exports, obviously people are concerned about the tariffs too. Not only tariffs that the president is imposing, but then retaliatory tariffs from other countries. Right. What impact do you think that's going to have?
Well, that's why I think what happened on Wednesday, that when the Europeans came to town, and you know we were worried about a trade war with Europe. Trump had put on the table a 20% tariff on their imported cars. If you're a country like Germany, that you know those are the BMWs and the Mercedes, that they sell a lot of cars in the United States. So they basically said, look, don't impose this tariff. We'll reduce our tariffs. That, by the way, that's the outcome Donald Trump wanted. He's not a trade protectionist. His view was we just want a level playing field. You know, if we're lowering our tariffs, you got to lower yours, and I think you got a deal there. The big enchilada here is China, because China is the second biggest world economy. We're in a big dispute with them when we are in a tit-for-tat trade war with them. So I'm hopeful that we see a resolution with this that lowers the. You know, China does. They're a big problem. They cheat. They steal. We estimate as much as $500 billion a year of stolen American intellectual property and so on. But you know, look, I agree with what Trump said. Today, the United States economy is growing faster than any of our international developed country rivals, and we're doing it right.
How do you think this strong economy will impact the midterms? Do you think the GOP will see a boost?
You know, normally, it's hard to predict midterms, you know, especially this far out. But normally, when you've got a good economy, I was looking at the results of midterms going back 50 years. When the economy is healthy like this, the Republicans are going to lose seats. But if this is the way people feel about it, because look, before the election, only 3 out of 10 Americans felt good about the economy. Today, it's 7 out of 10. That's a big, big increase. So people are not, it means that people aren't in a bad mood today like they were 2 years ago.
Okay, we'll be watching to see how all this plays out. Stephen Moore, former senior economic advisor to President Trump's campaign and distinguished fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks so much.
Well, it's nice to report some good news.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. The Trump administration says more than 1,800 migrant children ages 5 and older have been reunited with their parents, but more than 700 remain separated. The court-ordered deadline was yesterday. Now the federal judge who ordered the reunifications must decide how to address the hundreds of still separated children whose parents have been deported, as well as how much time, if any, reunified parents should be allowed to file asylum claims. Senators spar over access to background information on President Trump's Supreme Court nominee. Judge Brett Kavanaugh's role as White House staff secretary to President George W. Bush has become a flashpoint. Democrats say they want to see records from his time in that job. Republicans say it's an attempt to delay confirmation hearings. They hope to have Kavanaugh, a Catholic, on the court by the time the new term starts, October 1st. Massachusetts is the first state to repeal an abortion ban that predates the 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling. Republican Governor Charlie Baker signed a bill today that eliminates an unenforced law dating from the 1800s. Pro-abortion leaders fear a more conservative high court would undo Roe v. Wade, which would trigger old state laws. The remains of 55 U.S. soldiers killed in the Korean War are headed home. It fulfills a promise North Korean leader Kim Jong-un made to President Trump last month at their summit. A military plane flew to North Korea to pick up the remains. They will be transferred to a base in Hawaii next week. President Trump thanked Kim for keeping his word. President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines signs a bill creating a Muslim region in the Catholic country. Islamic leaders say they're very happy with the news. The deal gives Muslims an autonomous region in the south, and it may end a half-century of unrest there. Last year, government troops crushed an attempt by an Islamic State group to take over the region. Cardinal Rafael Sacco of Iraq is asking his people to come together to defeat extremism. In a letter to the Iraqi people, Sacco asked them to help promote harmony and unity in what he calls a devastated country. In recent years, Iraq has been consumed by violence and a rise in ISIS militants. 5 former nuns in Chile say they were sexually abused by priests. They say the incident took place when the priests visited their community, which is dedicated to caring for the sick. This is the latest accusation to rock the church in the Catholic country. A new scientific study is questioning the claim that the Shroud of Turin is really the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. Published in this month's Journal of Forensic Sciences, the study concludes that the bloodstains are supposedly not consistent with those left by a crucifixion, meaning it's a fake. But long-standing shroud experts have slammed the results. They question the methodology since the authors didn't have access to the actual shroud. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, who is behind this new study and how did they carry out their research?
Wyatt, the newest study was conducted by Matteo Borrini, a forensic anthropologist, and Luigi Garlaschelli, a chemist. They based their experiments on bloodstain pattern analysis. They used mannequins and volunteers, and they tried to recreate the circumstances of Christ's death with fake blood and sponges, since they didn't have direct access to the shroud itself. Now, they concluded that according to their simulations, the bloodstains were simply not realistic.
Well, it's not the first time the authenticity of the shroud has been disputed. How is the study, this new study, being received by longtime shroud experts?
Well, Emanuela Marinelli, who's been studying the shroud for more than 40 years, she told Vatican News website that such studies are often funded by ideological groups with clear agendas who want people to believe that the shroud is false historical artifacts. As she said, there is a sense of annoyance by those who want to deny Christ and his resurrection and the church. But the church isn't afraid to have legitimate scientific analysis. And Pope John Paul II in '98 said the specific competence to pronounce on these scientific questions regarding the shroud's authenticity was entrusted to scientists, and their task was to continue their investigations, Wyatt.
Well, that normally then leads to raising the question many Catholics ask, what is the Vatican's official position? Do they think it's real or not?
Good question, Wyatt. The church has never formally pronounced itself on whether this 14-foot by 4-foot linen cloth really is the cloth in which Jesus was wrapped after his crucifixion. But Pope Pius XII approved of the image in association with the devotion to the holy face of Jesus. And all of the recent popes, Wyatt, have visited the shroud. In '73, Pope Paul VI famously said that his heart told him it was genuine because when he looked at it, he saw the portrayal of the face of our Lord. And during a visit to Turin in 2010, Pope Benedict said it was a sign of hope because in it he saw the mirror of our suffering and the suffering of Christ. And Pope Francis was the last pope to visit there in 2015, Wyatt.
Well, it's so interesting to hear about the history of the shroud and how many popes have visited and what they've thought about it. Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Coming up, we examine Pakistan's elections, where a winner is named, but controversy lingers. And a writer describes how Humanae Vitae brought her to the Catholic faith. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Imran Khan is on his way to becoming Pakistan's next prime minister. Khan, a former cricket star, did not win an outright majority and must now form a coalition to govern. This is the third consecutive civilian government elected in Pakistan. Joining me now is Aparna Pandey, director of the Initiative on the Future of India and South Asia at the Hudson Institute. Aparna, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Wyatt.
This was a closely monitored election, but it's also one that there's a lot of accusations of fraud and manipulation. Khan is promising a new Pakistan. Realistically, can he deliver?
No, he cannot. Khan is the latest among what are referred to as the Pakistani establishment's favorite new politicians. So the Pakistani establishment, the military intelligence, does not really trust or like any civilian politician. So every few decades, they try to bring in a new person who will provide them with the ideal civilian facade. Nawaz Sharif used to be their earlier favorite. Once he started asserting control, trying to change foreign policy, domestic politics, even the blasphemy law last year, there was pushback, and therefore he was removed from power. And this time around, it's Imran who's in. Will Imran be able to change anything? No. One, he does not have outright majority, which the establishment did not want. Nobody should have outright majority. They should have a coalition so that they always remain on tenterhooks. Two, He believes a lot of what the establishment does, which is that, that foreign policy with respect to United States or blasphemy law or Islam or Pakistan being an Islamist country. So he is not going to bring in anything new except for the fact that he is not from a traditional or dynastic political party. He's not a traditional politician.
Sure, and you mentioned the blasphemy laws and how he's supported these. Explain exactly what the blasphemies are. We've heard that they target specifically Christians and other religious minorities. How so?
So Pakistan has one of the world's strictest blasphemy laws. They date back to the 1980s. The original blasphemy laws sort of were on the books, but were never applied. They date back to the British era, the colonial era. But they were never really applied either in India or Pakistan, any part of the British Raj. In the 1980s, General Zia-ul-Haq, the third military dictator of Pakistan, who was an Islamist personally, basically instituted these laws which target Pakistan's religious minorities, the Muslim minority of Ahmadis, and the non-Muslim, like especially the Christians, to some extent the Hindus and Sikhs, but primarily Ahmadis and Christians are the ones who are targeted. What these laws do is that you are, in case is that any accusation that you
it's really opposing any sort of Islam, isn't it? I mean, if you say something
against the Prophet, against Quran, against Islam, you can be lynched by a mob. You could be arrested and put in prison and spend the rest of your life there.
One of the examples is that our audience may remember is Aisha Bibi. She's the Christian woman who's on death row. She's in Pakistan convicted of violating the blasphemy laws. Do you think likely her case will get any attention from the new government, or do you think she'll just likely remain in jail?
She will most likely, unfortunately, she will remain in jail. I do not see any change right now, because the sad part is that what has happened is that you can accuse anybody. Miss Bibi, the accusation is that she blasphemed because of what she said, some words she uttered while she and some other women were sort of getting water from a well. Now, the last time someone tried to help her in 2011, the governor of the largest province of Punjab, Salman Taseer, was assassinated by his own bodyguard. And at that time, Pakistan's Christian Minister of Minority Affairs also was assassinated just a few months later. So 2 people were killed in 2011 trying to support Ms. Bibi. Since that time, no political party has come out in support. Last year, in 2017, the former political party in power, the PMLN, tried to make a minor adjustment in the electoral oath. That oath is supposed to basically say that, you believe in the finality of the Prophet. And there was a pushback. There was a movement called the Khatam-e-Nabuwat which started, which Imran Khan's party supported and Imran Khan himself supported.
Yeah, it's pretty scary to think about the history here, the background, and the fact that it's so hard just to be able to stand up for religious minorities for any minister in Pakistan. Aparna Pandey, Director of the Initiative on the Future of India and South Asia at the Hudson Institute, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
A Catholic leader from Nigeria says the terror group Boko Haram is wreaking havoc on his country.
Every life lost is one life too much, whether it's Christian life or Muslim life. What is important is that Nigerians ought to be safe wherever they are.
Cardinal John Onaiyekan joined a panel at the U.S. Institute of Peace today in Washington. The cardinal says Boko Haram does not represent most Muslims in Nigeria. He asked the faithful to pray for peace to prevail.
Up next, one of the finalists to be a Supreme Court nominee will address a Catholic group. And the Vatican releases a medal honoring Pope Francis.
Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. A judge on the short list for a possible appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court will speak at a national meeting of Catholic attorneys this fall. Federal Appeals Judge Amy Coney Barrett is the headline speaker at the Catholic Bar Association's convention in October in Dallas. The group says its mission is to help lawyers grow in their relationship with Christ. Barrett is a Catholic mother of 7. Humanae Vitae, Pope Paul VI's letter on contraception, marriage, and family, turned 50 this week. One writer says it was the reason she converted to Catholicism. Ashley McGuire, a senior fellow at the Catholic Association, writes in the Wall Street Journal today, quote, Disillusioned with a culture that habitually objectifies women, I found the document stirring, as did countless other converts, with its call to safeguard the reverence due to a woman. Ashley joins us now in studio. Welcome back to the program, Ashley.
Great to be with you.
When you read Humanae Vitae for the first time, you were 21 years old, you were not Catholic. 2 years later, you were baptized into the faith. What did the encyclical have, and what was it about it that had such an effect on you?
Well, I think my story is not actually that uncommon. I think the media narrative is that women are turned off by the church's teaching on women, when in fact, this was before all of the Me Too fallout. So this was, 10 years ago. Even then, I could see that what society had to offer women was insufficient. And so what the church was offering was something different, something very dignifying to women, something that accounted for the entire woman as she is. And that's what really captured my attention.
The group Catholics for Choice released a poll this week. They say 67% of Catholics in America disagree with the church's teaching on artificial contraception. Only 17% agree, and 16% say they're not sure. We should say Catholics for Choice is a group that dissents from church teaching. They're pro-abortion. And when you think about that kind of numbers, they're pretty staggering when you first hear that. What do you say to Catholics who disagree with the church's teaching on this?
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the teaching is. I would say start by reading the document. I think it's a less than a 30-minute commitment, and for me it was changed my life. But I think there's so much, we live in such an incredible time where because of science and technology, it's really made the teaching more accessible than it used to be. I think there's a misunderstanding that the teaching is incompatible with modern life for a woman, that it's oppressive to women, when in fact the women who live out the teaching would say the opposite, that it's very freeing, it's very dignifying, and it's very much compatible with modern life and with science.
You say the document's a lot more than just birth control. What do you mean by that?
Well, so much of it is about what is the human person? What is the purpose of the human person in life? What is the purpose of man and woman, both separately and together in marriage? Most of it is about marriage and what is married love. And contraception or the prohibition on contraception is one part of that. But I think it's been incorrectly cast as a prohibition when in fact what it is a call to live a certain life. And that's what the document is about.
It's also a document that people have called prophetic. When you look at all the problems that we're having in our society today, you also say science is slowly catching up. What do you mean by that?
Well, first to your first point, you're absolutely right that the things Pope Paul VI warned would happen if contraception became mainstream have absolutely come true, whether it's sex trafficking, pornography, the general oppression of women, the mistreatment of women. But no, what's incredible is that the church saw this before science and technology show that there absolutely are natural ways for the woman to preserve her right to her fertility while still living a modern life. And that's what's incredible. You have all these apps, you have ovulation test strips you can order off Amazon that make this very much a lifestyle that's easy to understand with advances in science and technology.
Well, it's so fascinating to delve into Humanae Vitae a little bit, and like you say, now it's so accessible, anybody can go online and read the document and just take a few minutes, and like I say, it could even change your life. Ashley McGuire, Senior Fellow at the Catholic Association, thanks so much.
Thank you.
The Vatican is preparing for the arrival of 60,000 altar servers next week. Today, banners were put on display around St. Peter's Square ahead of the international pilgrimage. The motto for this year's gathering is "Seek peace and pursue it." The Vatican has released a medal to commemorate the Holy Father's upcoming 6th anniversary as the leader of the Catholic Church. On one side of the medal, it has a dove on top of the papal coat of arms, symbolizing the gifts of the Holy Spirit to the Church. And on the other side, an olive branch above an image of a mother embracing her child. Circling around the edge of the medal is the phrase saying nothing is lost with peace. Starting tomorrow, the medal will be available for purchase at the Vatican. The Holy Father will celebrate his 6th anniversary as Pope in March of 2019. Incredible to think that it's almost 6 years since Pope Francis took over as the head of the church. Pretty incredible. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight and for this week. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.